Three players who have never shared the floor in an NBA game might already explain Golden State's future better than any one of them does alone. Brandin Podziemski is not a proven franchise point guard. Will Richard is not a high-usage scorer. And Yaxel Lendeborg has never played a regular season NBA minute. Somehow, that might be exactly why this works. Because the Warriors may not have found three future superstars. They may have found three players built to solve different parts of the same possession. So the real question is simple. Why do Yaxel, Podz, and Will make more sense together than they do separately? If you enjoy basketball being broken down through what actually happens on the floor, subscribe to Hoops Aftermath. Golden State has spent years asking some version of the same question. Who comes after Steph Curry? The Warriors once tried answering it through upside. James Wiseman arrived as the second pick. Jonathan Kuminga brought enormous athletic potential. Moses Moody became another young piece alongside a championship core that was still trying to win now. But succession in the NBA is rarely that clean. Wiseman moved on without becoming the centerpiece Golden State envisioned. Kuminga showed real ability, but his role never completely settled, and by February 2026 he had been traded to Atlanta. Moody took a different path and remains with the Warriors. The larger idea never produced a clear heir to Curry. Now Golden State is coming off a 37-45 season, and another young group is taking shape. Podz, Will, Yaxel. The difference is that this time, the most interesting question may not be which one becomes the superstar. It may be whether their games can make each other better. And Podziemski is the easiest place to see it. Podz can run offense. That's important to establish first. Last season, he averaged 13.8 points, 5.1 rebounds, and 3.7 assists while playing all 82 games. In Golden State's play-in loss to Phoenix, he finished with 23 points and 10 rebounds. He isn't helpless with the ball. The more interesting question is what happens when Golden State asks him to live with it. Steve Kerr has publicly described Podziemski as especially effective playing off another creator and operating as more of a secondary ball handler. That fits the way his game already works. Podz is dangerous when the defense has made its first mistake. He catches against the closeout and drives. He gives the ball up, relocates, then attacks when it returns. He rebounds and pushes before 5 defenders can get organized. And he can punish space as a shooter. More than 80% of his made threes last season were assisted. None of that means he can't create. It means his best possessions don't always need to begin with him staring at a set defense and being asked to solve everything. A primary creator has to bend the defense. A secondary creator gets to attack after it bends. Podz can do some of both. But if Golden State can reduce how often he has to make every difficult read himself, his versatility becomes much more useful. That leaves one obvious need. Someone has to receive the ball after Podz moves the defense and keep the possession alive. And just a couple days before the 2026 draft, Kerr had already described exactly what Golden State was looking for.
Well, good first night of the draft for us. I think we're excited to add Yaxel to the program.
According to Mike Dunleavy, when Golden State asked Kerr what the roster still needed, his answer was a forward who could fit in there and connect the game. Then the Warriors drafted Yaxel Lendeborg 11th. That wording matters. Because Yaxel's value has never depended on one dominant skill. His path was unusual from the beginning. He played only 11 varsity games in high school, developed at Arizona Western, and broke out at UAB. By 2025, Yaxel was already a projected first-round pick. He went through the NBA draft process, then made an unusual decision. On May 27th, he withdrew and chose one more college season at Michigan. And Michigan forced his game to expand. He had to operate farther from the rim, handle more decisions, play beside other bigs, defend different positions, move the ball without stopping the offense. By the end of the season, he averaged 15.1 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 3.2 assists, while shooting 37.2% from 3. But one number explains this fit better than the scoring does. 129 assists, just 42 turnovers. For a 6'9" forward, that's meaningful. A connector usually isn't the player who creates the first problem. He's the player who makes sure the defense doesn't recover from it. Imagine Podz gets into the lane and pulls a second defender toward him. He gives it up. Now Yaxel catches while the defense is already rotating. There is no reason to hold the ball and start over. If the corner is open, move it. If the low defender steps up, hit the cutter. If nobody closes, attack. If the defense switches, attack the matchup. Those choices sound simple. At NBA speed, they aren't. Every extra second gives the defense another chance to repair itself. That's why Yaxel's fit beside Podz is so interesting. Podz doesn't necessarily have to create the advantage and finish every read after it. If Yaxel's processing translates, Podz may only need to force the first rotation, but keeping an advantage alive means nothing if nobody eventually turns it into points. That's where Will Richard enters. Richard's development never depended on becoming the kind of player who needed 10 dribbles to matter. At Belmont and then Florida, he gradually became comfortable doing the things winning teams need away from the ball. Shoot, cut, relocate, defend, attack a closeout. At Florida, that role helped him become a national champion. In the 2025 title game against Houston, Richard scored 18 points and grabbed 8 rebounds as Florida came back to win 65-63. Memphis selected him 56th before his draft rights went to Golden State. As a rookie, Richard averaged only 6.4 points. That doesn't sound like the third piece of a future core. But his current offensive profile looks most natural after the defense has already been disturbed. A catch-and-shoot 3, a cut behind a defender watching the ball, one strong drive against a closeout, a relocation into open space. The shooting itself still has to improve. Richard made only 33.5% of his threes as a rookie. So calling him a proven NBA sniper would be premature, but Golden State doesn't need him to become a self-creating scorer for the fit to make sense. If Podz creates movement and Yaxel makes the next read, Richard can operate in the part of the possession where his game is already most comfortable. And that's the first real reveal. Maybe Golden State's young core doesn't need 3 players trying to become franchise stars. Maybe it needs 3 players who reduce how much the other 2 are being asked to do. Podz doesn't have to make every read. Yaxel doesn't have to dominate the basketball. Richard doesn't have to manufacture difficult offense. Their jobs become clearer because their jobs are different. If you enjoy these kinds of basketball stories, where fit matters as much as the box score, subscribe, because now the 3 pieces can finally be put on the same possession. There is one important limitation before going any further. There is still no official competitive sample of Podz, Yaxel, and Richard playing together. So none of this is proof. It is a projection based on what each player has already shown. Start with Podz. He attacks a ball screen and gets 1 foot into the paint. The weak side defender takes a step toward him. Podz doesn't force the shot. He gives it to Yaxel. Now Yaxel catches against a defense that is moving instead of waiting. Richard's man leaves the corner. The pass is there. The defender stays home. Yaxel has more room in the middle. Another defender rotates. Richard can cut behind him. Podz gives it up and relocates. The ball can find him again against a second closeout. The possession doesn't die when Podz gives up control. That's the point. Now reverse it. Yaxel grabs the rebound and pushes. Podz doesn't have to slowly organize against 5 defenders already set. Richard runs to space. The floor begins opening before the defense even finishes matching up. Podz receives the ball on the move, and suddenly he's attacking a completely different kind of possession. This is why the relationship matters more than simply saying one player helps another. Richard's spacing could give Podz and Yaxel more room. Podz's penetration could create the rotations Richard needs. Yaxel's passing could prevent Podz from having to finish every possession himself. And defensively, Richard can potentially take more difficult guard assignments while Yaxel's size gives Kerr another switchable forward beside 2 smaller guards. Golden State already plays a style that rewards this. The Warriors averaged 28.9 assists per game last season. Ball movement and rapid decision-making remain central to how this team wants to play. Yaxel and Richard even provided a small proof of concept in Summer League. Golden State won the 2026 championship 94-90 over Memphis. Yaxel finished with 21 points and 10 rebounds. Richard had 13 and made 3 threes. Podz wasn't part of that Summer League team, so that result tells us nothing definitive about the full trio. But it does show that Yaxel and Richard can occupy complementary roles without competing for the same possessions. Put Podz beside that, and the theoretical structure becomes visible. Podz can initiate or attack. Yaxel can connect. Richard can space and finish. It looks clean. Maybe too clean. Because every possession we just imagined had one thing in common. Somebody had already forced the defense to react. Against the best teams in basketball, that doesn't happen for free. This is the question that decides whether this trio becomes a foundation or simply three useful complementary players. Who creates the first advantage? Today, Golden State has veteran answers. Steph Curry can bend a defense before he even touches the ball. Jimmy Butler can force help around the rim. Kristaps Porzingis can change the geometry of the floor by pulling size away from the basket. Those are veteran solutions. Remove them from the equation and the young group becomes harder to evaluate. Richard isn't a primary creator. Yaxel hasn't played a regular season NBA possession. Podz is clearly the furthest along, and he may still grow into a much larger offensive role. But Kerr's comments tell us Golden State currently sees significant value in Podz when he doesn't have to control everything. So the trio's greatest strength may expose its biggest weakness. They could become very good at extending an advantage without having an elite player who consistently creates one from nothing. And that difference matters most when defenses have time to prepare. In the playoffs, opponents know your actions. They can switch the screen, stay home on shooters, load the paint, force the same player to beat the same matchup again and again. Eventually, somebody has to make two defenders care about him at once. Podz may eventually become that player. Yaxel may develop much further than his current projection. Richard's shooting may reach another level. But if none of those things happens, Golden State's answer probably comes from outside the trio. A future draft pick, a trade, a young scorer added before the Curry era completely closes. Not because Podz, Yaxel, and Richard failed, because their fit may make it much easier to identify exactly what the roster still needs. And that changes how Golden State's future should be judged. The Warriors don't necessarily need another Steph Curry to emerge from these three players. That's an impossible standard. What they might already have is the structure around whoever eventually becomes the lead creator. Podz gives you a guard who can handle, rebound, shoot, and attack a moving defense. Yaxel gives you size, passing, and the possibility of a forward who keeps possessions from dying. Richard gives you a low-maintenance guard whose game can function without controlling the basketball. Golden State has publicly made clear that Podz remains part of its plans, and he's eligible for an extension. Kerr is still under contract. Draymond Green is still there too, giving Yaxel the chance to develop inside a system that has valued connective forward play for more than a decade. Maybe Podz becomes more than a secondary creator. Maybe NBA spacing unlocks another level of Yaxel's game. Maybe Richard's shot settles into the version Golden State needs. Or maybe the organization eventually adds the fourth piece, the player who can break the defense first and make all three of these roles even more valuable. That would be the real payoff. Not three young stars replacing three legends. A young structure strong enough that the next star doesn't have to do everything alone. That's why Yaxel, Podz, and Will are interesting together. Not because we already know they'll work. We don't. There is still no official competitive sample of all three playing together, and not because Golden State has somehow discovered another Steph, Klay, and Draymond. Their games are interesting because they appear to answer different questions inside the same possession. Podz can start movement, Yaxel can preserve it, Richard can punish the space it creates, and the weakness they share, elite primary creation, doesn't destroy the theory. It makes Golden State's next decision clearer. Maybe one of these three eventually becomes that creator. Maybe the Warriors have to draft or trade for him. Either way, the future may not depend on finding one young player capable of becoming Steph Curry. It may depend on building a group where nobody is asked to be. So if Golden State eventually adds one more young piece beside Podz, Yaxel, and Will, what should that player be? A scoring guard? A jumbo creator? A rim-protecting center? Let me know below. And if there's another basketball fit or roster puzzle you want broken down like this, subscribe and leave it in the comments.